Honestly, this entire video was just going to be me trying to convince myself that the Nets actually have a chance at winning the title next year and aren't just going to completely fall apart, because that's how it happens for all of my sports teams. Case in point. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, we're talking about the Brooklyn Nets. Their season, unfortunately, recently ended in a first-round series sweep against the Toronto Raptors, but now we get to talk about really what it became clear pretty quickly was going to be the focal point of this whole Nets situation, and that was next season. With Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving both being healthy, the other complementary pieces around those guys, now is the time for them to potentially be a championship contender going into next season. So in this video, we're going to talk about what happened this season, how that sets them up for next year, and some of the offseason stuff as well that could potentially happen for them this offseason. I almost said this summer, but it's not going to be this summer. But really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. I upload multiple times a week, and leaving a like rating is a great way to let me know that you're enjoying the content, and it helps the video out a ton as well. With that said, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so as I kind of talked about in the intro, everything right now for the Brooklyn Nets is focused on making sure that they're, one, healthy, and two, a championship and title contender not only next year, but moving forward as well, as long as Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are on the roster. And the first important point of that, and why the team brought the team to the bubble that they did, of course, is making sure that everybody is healthy. If Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are not 100% fully healthy, back to their old selves, which I know is going to be more difficult for Durant, if they're not those guys, it's going to be that much more difficult for this team to accomplish the goals that they want to accomplish next season, because I think they do have plenty of pieces around those two guys, but obviously everything revolves around those two. And generally that wouldn't be that big of a deal, but with the way that this season has gone and when next season is going to start, which is still unclear, you want to make sure that those guys are obviously 100% healthy. Okay, so let's talk about the offseason stuff. So the biggest priority, and the Nets have come out and said this, for their own offseason is re-signing Joe Harris. Because if you're putting together a group of 5 to 10 players that are perfect complementary options alongside, whether it be 2 stars or 1 star, when you're building some kind of quote unquote super team and you want complementary options, I think Joe Harris is somewhere within the top 10 of guys that you would want on the team. He's one of the best shooters in the entire league, and he's not a great defender, but he competes on that end and he does the best that he can to try and impact the game in other ways outside of shooting, while also being one of the best shooters in the league. And he is a free agent this offseason, really the only significant free agent on this roster, unless you're counting Wilson Chandler as a significant free agent. And I would imagine the Nets are going to be very aggressive in making sure that they bring back Joe Harris. And there's mutual interest from both sides. The Nets are where Harris kind of found his role in the NBA. He came to them, I believe, from Cleveland after really not getting very many NBA minutes, and has become a really, really good NBA player while there in Brooklyn. And I'm sure he wants to compete for a title next year as well. So it's going to take some money to bring him back, somewhere in the $10 to $15 million range, but I think the Nets are going to be willing to do that. Given all the other resources they've already invested into this team, I don't think they're going to start pinching pennies now and let Joe Harris walk. He made, I think, around like $8 million this past season, so he'll get a bit of a raise, and that will be pretty much the only big roster move for them this offseason as it relates to free agency. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be some roster shuffling for this team, because there are 2 pieces here that I think are really important that could potentially be moved this offseason. The first one is pretty obvious, and it's Caris Levert. I've talked about him a little bit in some recent videos, and I think that people are realizing how good Caris Levert can be depending on the role that he plays within a team. And the role that he really needs to play is as someone that is a perimeter creator, that has the basketball in his hands a good amount of the time, that has a good amount of offensive responsibility. And that's just not going to happen very often in Brooklyn when they have their full team, whether it's Spencer Dinwiddie being healthy or, of course, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Those guys need the basketball in their hands, and Levert has an overlapping skill set with all 3 of those players. And I think if you're looking for someone that has a significant amount of value in the trade market as well, Levert is that guy, because obviously they're not trading KD or Kyrie. And I think Spencer Dinwiddie's skill set is enough of a difference away from KD and Kyrie to be a really good 6-man for this group. He can shoot the ball, he can attack off the dribble, whereas Levert really is primarily just an on-ball player. So that can sound like kind of a bad thing for the Nets, but I think it's actually a good thing, because even though Levert doesn't have a ton of value to them when their roster is fully healthy, he has a significant amount of value to other teams that do need perimeter creation and youth, because he is still such a young player and he's signed to a long-term contract. So I would not be surprised at all to see the Nets make a move to trade Caris Levert this offseason, either for a wing defender or a combo 3-4 type player to help out the rotation, kind of spread the wealth from where the guards and the perimeter creators are into some more wing defender and combo forward type players they can defend and can shoot. I've talked about that in a couple of different videos, but the other thing that is probably more likely here, if we're being completely honest, based off the history of these kinds of situations within the NBA, is Caris Levert is going to be dangled for a potential third star, whether that be Bradley Beal or if you're counting Buddy Hield as a star. I outlined a Kings trade involving Caris Levert the other day. And I think that is probably, if we're going by likelihood, even though that's not the route that I would suggest, it's probably more likely that the Nets are going to hunt for that third star before they look for complementary options in exchange for Caris Levert. Now, it's always possible that they keep Levert because of the obvious injury issues to Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, and Spencer Dinwiddie has had some injury issues at times as well. And so keeping Levert on the roster isn't a bad idea if you think that you're going to need him to kind of help the team stay afloat while KD and Kyrie are potentially hurt during the season. That's definitely a thought, but I think in general, if you're looking at let's try and be a championship contender this year, the correct move is to move Caris Levert, despite the fact that I really like him as a player. It's all been set up for this year and next year, and Levert unfortunately just has too much of an overlapping skill set and too much value to other teams to keep on the roster. The other piece here that I think is interesting to keep an eye on in terms of this offseason is Taurean Prince. And he's a player that I was excited about getting in what was essentially a salary dump move in order to sign Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving last offseason. And Taurean Prince was just kind of thrown in the deal because the Hawks didn't want to pay him. The Nets signed him to an extension, and I thought he was a great fit on the roster. One of those combo 3-4 guys that can shoot, that can defend, and has a little bit of on-ball creation ability as well. And he just didn't have the kind of season that I'd hoped that he would. And it was a weird situation. It was an up and down year. Kyrie was healthy, then he wasn't. There was some turmoil. They fired the coach. So it's not the end of the world that he had a bad year, but I think he's really important to this team next season if they keep him. But I also think he has at least a little bit of value on the open market, potentially being involved in a Caris Levert trade alongside him, again, to potentially get a third star there. Now, I think it's less likely that he gets moved than it is that Levert gets moved, because I think he has a legitimate role to fill on this team that is really necessary as that combo forward. He just needs to play better next season. It's also worth mentioning here that the Nets do have the Sixers first round pick this year, but they do not have their own. Okay, last up, let's talk about the head coaching stuff. So to be clear, I'm not buying into the Gregg Popvich stuff. Every single franchise in the league almost would want Gregg Popvich as their head coach right now. They would replace their head coach with Gregg Popvich tomorrow if he wanted to. So the rumors about Popvich potentially joining the team, I'm not buying into them at all. Yeah, he's a favorite of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. It's cool. He's a favorite of a lot of players throughout the league. He's either going to retire in San Antonio or he's just going to keep coaching there for the next couple of years. And that's going to be what's going to happen to Gregg Popvich this offseason. At least right now, that's where I'm thinking. I don't see him as the kind of guy that's going to want to go to an entirely different team and try and coach them within the last couple of years of his career. I don't see it. Now, as far as the head coaching stuff is concerned, I think Jacques Vaughn has done an awesome job in the bubble, but I just don't think that's the direction the team is going to go with their head coach, because really, I think this is going to be a situation similar to Frank Vogel in LA. Not that he's not a good coach, not that he hasn't done an awesome job with that team this year, but it's going to be more about the players, and it's going to be more about the talent on the roster and less about scheme. And really, they're going to bring in a coach that the players like, that is going to be able to rally them together to get them to focus on the common goal of winning a championship. And so more than likely, they're going to go in the direction of someone like Ty Lue, potentially, that has a relationship with Kyrie Irving and that would, be a good fit with that roster. Maybe not schematically, but in terms of just helping those guys focus and bringing them together as a team. I think that's more the skill set they're looking for here, rather than some kind of X's and O's master, because I just don't think that guy is really out there in the first place. And it's a tough head coaching environment right now to try and find a guy like that. So really, you're going to be going with someone more than likely like Ty Lue, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that this is a roster that is certainly talented enough, regardless of scheme, to do a lot of things next season and potentially compete for a title. And really, you just want to make sure that the top two guys are happy. And I know that sounds weird to say, and a lot of people are probably like, what are you talking about? You can't just, you can't just do everything you can for the players all the time. You got to do some stuff for the team. That's the reality of where we are in the NBA, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. I think that's just where we are, and I think someone like Ty Lue is going to end up being the coach of this team. And as far as the expectations for next year, I am, of course, biased. But I don't think it's unrealistic to expect this team to be one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference if they're healthy. And if everything clicks right, they can absolutely be a championship contender. However, they also, I would say, have one of, if not the biggest gap between where things could be for them this season in a positive direction and where things could also potentially be in a negative direction. If Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, if one of them gets hurt for a significant amount of time, or both of them, things are going to go downhill pretty quickly with this team. Now, if both of those guys are healthy, I think they can legitimately compete for a title, but I don't think it's all that likely that both of them are healthy, so I'm not getting my hopes up for anything outside of a top 4 finish in the Eastern Conference and potentially a postseason run if those guys are healthy. But beyond that, I'm still tempering my expectations for the Nets going into next season. And yeah, there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.